Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to Justworks' fourth installment of the Ask an Expert series. Today's webinar is subtitled, How Can Small Businesses Apply Lessons Learned from Past Crises to the Current Climate? I'm Moses Ballion, a certified HR consultant at Justworks, where I assist our customers with HR best practices support, as well as employment regulation compliance. With me today is Justworks' SVP and Chief Operating Officer, Mike Seckler. Mike, we are so thrilled to have you today and the benefit from your expertise.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Awesome, me too. Let's get rolling. I want to let everyone know that the format of the Ask an Expert series is that our first 15 minutes are devoted to a presentation, which Mike will give to you today. And then the back half is for live Q&A. So think about your questions, prepare them in advance, and then ask away when you're ready. Be sure to use the Q&A function on the bottom of your Zoom bar. So with that, let's get rolling, Mike. I'm excited to dive in.
All right.
But first, our standard disclaimer. Please know that this material is prepared for informational purposes only and shall not be construed as tax, legal, or other accounting advice. So with that,
definitely not legal advice. Don't take anything today like that.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. I like that disclaimer better. That's a little more contemporary, so thank you. Great. So Mike, I know about your background. I'm excited for everyone else to hear about it too. You, it turns out, as a young entrepreneur, were put in the situation of having to navigate the dot-com bust, of which we've all heard so much about. So please share your story.
Yeah. Well, hey, thanks everybody for coming. I'm really excited to get a chance to talk. So I'm at Justworks now and been involved with the company for a bit. But back when I was much younger, I was a young entrepreneur and we started a company named Employees in 1996 because we saw an opportunity to democratize access to HR software by building an application from the ground up for the internet. And so we were one of the first SaaS companies in the HR software space, and we had a lot of early success because what we were doing was enabling small businesses to access all the functionality that previously had been accessible only to very large companies. And I guess the start of the story is that, we got the business going. As the dot-com boom heated up, we felt pretty good about ourselves, right? Capital was easy to access. We were, in magazines, everyone was telling us how smart we were. But even though, if we believed every press release, we might have had 15 competitors at the time, we felt great. We felt no danger whatsoever, and we were completely blind to the incredible challenges that were right in front of us.
But as it would turn out, some of those challenges turned into blessings. I'm excited to dive into what that meant for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, it takes a little bit of time to get to the blessings, but the thing I would just say is that overnight, what happened with the dot-com boom is that it was followed by a bust, right? And so, the NASDAQ, went down by something like 80% over a couple of years. And what happened was things felt so good, but overnight, our world changed. The dot-com bubble popped and everything got super hard. Our customers were shrinking or going out of business. Nobody was interested in investing in our company. No reporters were interested in writing stories about us. And we faced the very real possibility of going out of business if we didn't make hard decisions. And so,
I've got a visualization of that bust,
yeah,
Mike, just to really send it home for everyone. I know we're all looking at a lot of charts these days. Our first lesson that we're going to dive into is win by surviving, which directly relates to what we're talking about here. And here I've prepared is
oh yeah, there you
what
go.
you're talking about.
Yeah. So this time was brutal. So we had to lay off a third of our team. We had to take a very dilutive round of financing, and we had to endure a few years of excruciatingly slow growth. But what happened was, after a few years, the craziest thing happened, which was that those 15 competitors that were around at the boom at the top had all gone away. They had either gone out of business or been sold for pennies. And so it was really that by simply surviving the downturn, by surviving the extinction event for dot-com companies, we won our little niche. And we then went on to grow that for the business for a couple more years. We sold it to ADP in 2006, where it ultimately became the core of a product called Workforce Now that you may have heard of. And a lot of our people that we hired out of college in those days are now running huge parts of that company.
Sure. You know, you use the term extinction event, and I think that's such a fascinating term. My best friend's a biologist and soon to be doctor. And, you know, he took me to the Field Museum in Chicago about a year ago, and we had if you can go to a natural history museum with a biologist, I recommend it.
Awesome.
But he shared with me what extinction event means. And it turns out throughout the history of the planet, there's been about 5 where like 95% of species get wiped out, and the resulting survival is sort of the 5% that have naturally adapted most successfully to their environment, and it ends up being beneficial for their survival and propagation as a species. So I think the rooting that it has in sort of scientific nomenclature is pretty interesting.
Absolutely.
Um, so
I mean, you know, they're just building on that. I mean, the lesson I'd say is that, you know, it's like survival, but then to thrive, right? If you can survive these events, and you see this with Amazon. Amazon stock went down 90% in this period of time, from $100 to $10 a share. And they were nervous that Barnes and Noble was going to figure out how to sell books online and make them irrelevant. But they survived the downturn, and then they went on, like those species you're talking about that survive these extinction events, they went on to kind of rule the earth, right?
watch out, Amazon. Borders is going to get you.
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah. So, you know, we talk about cycles and this undulating up and down. We've got economic reality on the one hand, and sort of the psychological component of human behavior and perception on the other hand. So you had some interesting insights to share.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I would just say, the big lesson, and this was only obvious to me in retrospect, but hopefully some of you will, you know, come out of this economic event and have this same feeling, is that, you know, when things felt the best in retrospect was when all the risk was right in front of us. We just couldn't see it. And then when things felt like the worst, when we had to make all the hard decisions to preserve our business, you know, we thought about quitting, it just felt so hard. But at the bottom, we couldn't see that, in fact, all the risks were gone. It was only upside from there. And so the takeaway is that I think like how we perceive our current, like however it feels in the moment, it can really be deceiving. And sometimes the risks are greatest when you feel the best, but all the opportunity can be the greatest when you feel the worst. And so that's been really helpful to me as we've kind of navigated, you know, some difficult times since the dot-com bust. And I think it's helpful to us as we chart the course at Justworks right now.
Awesome. And we're going to get into seizing opportunities in just a second. But first, I want to get to our second lesson, which deals with leading with empathy. So empathy is a big word, one that we use a lot, especially in contrast to sympathy. I think empathy the 5th grade summary is putting yourself in someone else's shoes, or walking a day in their shoes is the expression. So that comes to inform some of the hard decisions that you might have to make, both from an operations and business perspective, as well as people. So how has empathy guided you in your career, Mike?
Right. Well, so there's a real big lesson in this. So we learned a lot of important lessons during that downturn. But one was that by making the decisions that terrified us early enough, and by doing it with empathy and explaining the logic behind what we had to do to our people, we preserved our integrity, we maintained relationships, and we saved our business all at the same time. See, what happened was it became clear that we needed to make hard decisions, or else our business was likely not going to survive. We didn't wait for our investors to tell us to do that. We just did it, and we did it early. And because we did it early, we were able to take care of people a bit on the way out. I mean, not like a large Coca-Cola company might, but, you know, give people a month of severance. And so that was one piece. But the other piece was that we talked to the whole company, both the people who we wanted to stay and the people we were letting go. And we explained to them the nature of the situation and why we had to make this decision. And a couple of interesting things happened. One was the people who were going to stay. Well, one, that was important because it helped them both understand the logic of what was happening, and it helped them feel safe because they could see that by making this decision, we weren't probably going to have to do another one of these reductions in force. But they also felt better about staying because they saw that their colleagues, who they cared a lot about, were treated with respect. And, you know, that was, I'm proud of how we handled that.
That's awesome. So that brings me to an anecdote you shared with me, that your offboarding went so well that...
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say at the time, it wasn't clear the offboarding went well. We did the best we could. But what happened is that, you know, 2 years later, let's say, somewhere around there, we were hiring again. A lot of the people that we let go, they wanted to come back to our company because they felt good about the company. They felt good about our values, but they also felt good about how they were treated in a really difficult situation. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that we could make that kind of hard decision, and what was tough in the moment, that we were able to preserve those kinds of relationships, that people would want to come back. That was one of the biggest, lessons of the whole period.
As an HR professional, that is inspiring. What I've heard called boomerang employees is a really strong signifier that you've got something special going on, that you're treating your people right. So this has been a recurring theme in, I think, every Ask an Expert webinar to date, is giving employees the credit to understand your decision-making process. And in so doing, they come to develop a sense of ownership and respect for the business, that even if they're in a really tough spot, at least they can kind of understand where you're coming from, and as a result act as a positive brand ambassador for you going forward, whether they return or not.
Yeah, I think that's right, for sure.
Thanks, Mike. Our third lesson before we get to our Q&A is on preserving resources. And so this gets back to our first point as far as seizing opportunities and thriving in difficult times, turning downturns into major opportunities. So you used, we're going to talk about cost and expenses. So before you use the analogy with me of, identifying excess, and the comparison you made was that fancy gym that you belong to that you don't go to often enough to really make it worth your while. So how can we extend that metaphor to our operating expenses?
Sure, right. Well, on that metaphor, right, when times are good as individuals, it's easy to accumulate some habits or subscriptions, right, like this gym membership that you don't really need. And it's easy to forget about them. But when things get rough and all of a sudden you're like, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to pay my rent, and you think about, where am I spending money? These are obviously the first places you go. And companies have these same sorts of things, by looking at every dollar that's being spent and thinking about, is it core to what I need to have to serve our customers? Is it important to like my growth aspirations, or the company's growth aspirations? Or is it really in this bucket of excess? And it can take lots of forms. Vendor relationships where you bought too many seats that you're using. You can find it throughout the business. And the reason why it's super important to think about this, and it's not rocket science, right? The hard thing, I think, is as individuals, sometimes we wish the world was different than it was. So the hard thing is just dealing with the world as it is. But the point is that every dollar of unnecessary spend, of excess spend, adds unnecessary risk to your business. Risk that you might not be able to survive the downturn if it worsens, because if you had more resources, you would have more time or more flexibility. But it also, you're not just trying to survive for survival's sake, you're trying to survive, then ultimately thrive. And so every dollar that you reserve, you can then reinvest in your business as you try to reignite growth. So it's super important to make these decisions.
Thanks for that, Mike. I think separating it into, this sort of, I love this target symbol, and this sort of three-pronged generalized categorization can be really helpful in identifying what is core, what is growth, what is excess. I'm going to throw you a curveball here, and it's kind of the meat of the matter. How do we know what the growth opportunities are and what is excess? How do we make that differentiation? As an employee, I love my modern benefits. I'm going to say, that ClassPass membership Justworks provides me, that's make or break to how I, my benefits as an employee. Maybe the business doesn't see it that way. So that's a trivial example, but how do you know where to invest your limited resources during this time?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's super contextual. I don't know if there's any one way to answer that for all folks. I just think you and your teams need to come together and think about, like, what does it take to serve our customers today? If we cut into this, it would impair our ability to deliver the level of service that our customers demand and expect. That's core. And then you need to reflect on what's the most important things that we want to do that we're not currently doing. And this is true even in good times. You may have 10 ideas about how to grow your business, but you can't do all 10 at once. So you got to pick which one's the best. And so it kind of I think it's the same kind of framework. It's if we have one bet we can make, is it to offer ClassPass to my employees to like keep them jazzed? Or is it to, invest in some new product because it's going to open up a new market? And so I think you have to rank order these things. You have to debate them. And, the quality of your outcome is going to be driven by, the rigor of the way you make, you bring to that decision process.
Thanks. Those sound like some hard but intellectually rigorous debates, and getting the right people in the room, I imagine, is crucial to making a sort of order of operations
Absolutely.
and a laundry list of those decisions. Well, our lesson here, preserving resources, I think all points to the idea of finding stability and resilience, and hopefully to thrive in the near-term future. So I know that JustWorks is pretty different from employees, is pretty different from Coca-Cola. So can you sort of share the contrast of your prior experience with your current experience?
Well, I mean, the biggest difference here is that, that dot-com bust happened when Employees was a less mature company than JustWorks is today.
Okay.
So JustWorks, we're in a different spot. We have a lot of money in the bank, and we feel it's important to do that or to maintain that because we have this mission of helping small businesses and entrepreneurs grow with confidence. And to do that well, you need to have a rock solid balance sheet so that you can withstand the natural bumps in the night that happen when you have billions of dollars moving around in payroll dollars and benefits premiums. But we've allocated, what we're doing is we've allocated some of our cash, though, to spend through the downturn to keep our business strong. And then we reserve some as well to be able to kind of reinvest in the business to reignite growth on the kind of the tail end of the downturn, to reignite growth as we come out of it. And so that's the framework that we're using here. And I can tell you more about it, but that's, I guess, the high level summary.
Sure, and maybe we'll get into that in the Q&A, but thanks for that. And I know as JustWorks, one of our key, foundational products is payroll. And so I think for us, cash is more of a stabilizing element than, it's a crucial stabilizing element for us. It's like we move cash. That's one of the things we do. So it's cool to see JustWorks stabilizing itself and making those prudent decisions as an employee here.
Yeah.
Great. So in summary, before we jump into our live Q&A, we talked about win by surviving, leading with empathy, especially with respect to your employment decisions, and then preserving resources with the eventual end goal of finding stability and resilience, and finally thriving following times of downturn and uncertainty. So thanks so much for sharing your background and experience, Mike.
Thank you. Yeah.
Really, it's a inspiring story, and a time we talk about the dot-com bubble and the years surrounding that. There's so many insights to glean and comparisons to make, while at the same time realize just how unique of a situation we find ourselves today. So with that, let's jump right in. I see some great questions coming through. Let's see. Okay, so the first one, Mike, this is coming from an attendee. As a small tech company, we've seen sales trending downward from growth, and we're reducing operating expenses. What else can we do to ensure the company's survival during this time? We spoke to that a little bit, but maybe this is an opportunity to expand.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the highest level, it's kind of a math equation, right? You have money coming in and you have money going out, and they have to match, right? And so if you're running at a deficit, if you're running with losses, there's this concept called runway. So you have the amount of money you have in the bank and you have the amount of money you're burning, and that tells you how many months you have before you have a real big problem. And so, the way we've always thought about it is what's the runway? How can we extend, the runway? And on the revenue side, trying to win business is easy, or an easy answer. Something that, companies will do is they'll provide some kind of discount to get customers to pay up front to bring that cash in front loaded, so that can improve the equation. But then on the expense side, it's the kinds of things we're discussing. For most, software related companies, the dollars are primarily in headcount. And so it's hard to cut too much unless you're willing to reduce staff. Other kinds of companies may have other things that they spend money on, other levers. But ultimately, it's about extending that runway and giving yourself a chance to either get to cash flow break even or to start showing those important next sets of metrics that will allow you to attract investment dollars.
And this is one of those reasons that, some of the airlines I book trips on are giving me credits as opposed to refunds, right? Is so that they can use that to maintain their runway and propel themselves into a bright future.
Yeah, I mean, like using your biology example, like for a business, and it's easy to forget this in good times, but in down times, it becomes pretty clear that for a business, cash is oxygen, right? And so you're looking at your oxygen tank and it's going down. And you have to think about, you're either gonna have to get to the surface before that runs out, or you're gonna have to figure out how to fill up that tank. And
I like that. Thanks for extending that metaphor, Mike. I appreciate it. All right, we have another question. How do we balance providing guidance to our team while also ourselves navigating the uncertainty as leaders?
well, at JustWorks, we have a core value of openness or transparency. And it kind of relates back to what I was describing at employees, where we were just very open with people about the decision we had to make. I think there is a period when you're figuring things out where it probably doesn't make sense to take everyone on the ride of trying to figure out, what the answer is. But as soon as you have a sense of the answer, I think you get really good results, as Moses, you were saying, by walking people through the logic of what needs to be done. And I think people live up, they live up to the level of the expectations you hold them to. And when you treat people like adults and trust that they're going to understand the situation when you lay out the facts, you get better outcomes. So I think that's what the question was. But so I think the balance is try to figure out what you want to do, but the moment you do, bring people along and you won't regret it.
Thank you. I think that definitely answers the question. Tanzia Islam has an excellent question I'd love to put you on the spot for.
Oh, good.
And it's going to be specific to each individual circumstance, but maybe if you have some generalized guidance. Is it better to reduce the size of different departments or to get rid of a less important department entirely in critical situations, like right now?
Well, I don't know enough about the situation to really opine on it. I mean, if there was truly a less important department, then maybe that would be the answer. But I think using that kind of core growth and excess framework would be the way I would look at it. So if, let's say you had, a core business and you had some money going to something that was truly exploratory, and then the market turned really south on you, the right answer might be to stop spending on that exploratory project for now. But if that division is core to your ability to serve customers, and it's part of why they signed up with you, I think if you were to cut that or cut too far into it, could really be counterproductive. And so these are super hard decisions, I think, very contextual in terms of the right answers, but that's my thought.
Wow. I mean, that sounds like everything's a little, challenging right now, but that sounds like a fascinating question to tackle on an individual business level. How mature has your exploration gotten? Is it sticking? Is that something that's going to propel you out of this, or is that going to be weight that drags you down and, to your point, detracts from your core product and delivering the promises that your customers foundationally expect of you? Big questions, and right answers are hard to come by, and time will tell, I suppose. Fascinating. Great. Mike, let me get to another. This is about restructuring.
Okay.
Is this the best time to restructure our business workflows and get better software systems? Or will returning staff, presumably from furlough, have too many challenges to adjust to, i.e. too much change too soon? So let me get that again. Restructure business workflows, invest in software, but when people come back, is that just too much to deal with right now?
I have a strong opinion on this one. I think one of the silver linings, so if you're like on a growth trajectory and then all of a sudden you have this unwelcome period of pause brought on by an economic crisis, by a pandemic, one silver lining can be that it's an opportunity to visit all those decisions you made during that period of rapid growth. When you're bolting on the wings of the airplane as you're going down the runway, all of a sudden now you can take a breath and look at those decisions and say, how do we feel about them now? Maybe they were great. Maybe though, they served us for a time. But when we think about where we want to go in the future, we want to have a different foundation for the business we want to grow. And so now is a really opportune time to visit all business processes, all systems, all ways of doing work, so that as you come out of the downturn, you're now building on the foundation you want to live with for the next couple of years.
Wow. Thanks, Mike. Some really great insights today. And I want to thank you for the benefit of your expertise. With that, let's wrap up. Give everyone 4 minutes back during the precious time we have these days. Again, Mike, Chief Operating Officer at JustWorks, thank you so much for joining us today.
All right, Moses, thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. I want to remind all attendees and registrants, for those who didn't attend, Following this, you will receive an email with resources, blog posts. We're also going to answer one question that we didn't get to on today's Q&A in our email, as well as a recording of today's webinar. So with that, tune in next time. I'm Moses Balian. Be well and stay safe.